There is a structural design that has dismantled every dominant empire in history. Not conquest, not invasion, not revolution, but financial fatality, specifically currency collapse. And the mechanism operates the exact same way every single time. Rome, the empire that governed the known world for 5 centuries, fell when its currency became debased and worthless. Spain, which controlled more gold than any nation, declared sovereign bankruptcy repeatedly until its structure dissolved. Britain, which dominated global trade for 200 years, lost its empire within a decade after its currency failed. 4 times in recorded history, a dominant empire has followed this exact sequence. Imperial overextension, chronic deficit spending, currency debasement or excessive printing, hyperinflation, final loss of confidence, and systemic collapse. You have felt it, that precise, exhausting suspicion that the rules you mastered were never designed for your success, but for your maximum utilization. You've achieved the professional success the structure promised, only to find yourself a higher-paid prisoner in the same rat race, realizing the true cost of your career is measured in your increasing financial fragility. That feeling, that cold, cynical recognition, is your first piece of evidence that you have been operating under a lie. The numbers confirm your internal exhaustion is not psychological. It is the correct systemic diagnosis. The United States debt now accelerates at over $1 trillion every 100 days. It is a number so absurd, so structurally terminal, that the only rational response is to ask, who is paying for this? Not with future taxes, but right now, today. The answer is not the oligarchs, and certainly not the central planners who enable the spending. The cost is externalized directly onto you, the professional, the entrepreneur, the exhausted elite, through the most subtle and ancient tax ever devised, currency debasement. The truth is far more brutal than simple mismanagement. You are being paid in the denarius of 265 AD, 95% worthless metal, with the emperor's face still on it. Your hard-earned capital is the collateral for the sovereign's fatal delusion. The notion that modern finance has insulated us from the patterns of collapse is the illusion of modernity. The arrogant belief that central planning, quantitative easing, and global reserve status somehow repealed the absolute laws of financial physics. But history is not a collection of anecdotes. It is a laboratory for structural logic. Every empire that has destroyed itself has followed an identical mathematical process, and the core of that process is the betrayal of value embedded in the currency. It starts with a structural imperative: imperial overextension. Rome, at its height, controlled 60 million people across 3 continents. Its military expansion, its infrastructure, its administrative sprawl demanded more resources than the state collected. This financial pressure forced the government into its first act of structural betrayal, reducing the silver content of the denarius. The historian Gaius Plinius Secundus, Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century AD, observed the changing weights of the currency, marking the beginning of the end. Under Emperor Nero, the silver purity of the denarius, which for centuries was nearly 100%, was first reduced. Why? Not out of necessity, but out of greed and the need to fund a lavish, unsustainable administration. By creating 11 coins where only 10 existed before, the emperor extracted a hidden tax. This was a structural move, not an accident. The government was spending more than it earned, and rather than cut the empire, they began to cut the intrinsic value of your money. This structural dishonesty became terminal. By the time of Emperor Gallienus in 265 AD, the coin was nearly worthless, a copper disc dipped in a thin layer of silver. The government told the Roman soldier nothing had changed. The coin still carried the emperor's face, but its purchasing power had collapsed. This structural deception led directly to the breakdown of the economy, where merchants eventually demanded barter instead of the debased coin, implicitly validating Gresham's law: bad money drives out good. The empire couldn't pay its legions or maintain its roads because the currency, the fundamental layer of trust, had been corrupted. The collapse wasn't caused by invasion, it was a self-inflicted economic suicide. This pattern is not a coincidence. It is a feedback loop, a structural formula for self-destruction that repeats with cynical precision across epochs. Standalone transition phrase: this is not history repeating, it is the same math. The Spanish Empire provides the critical refinement to this formula, the paradox of infinite wealth leading to economic ruin. Spain controlled the Cerro Rico of Potosí, the largest silver deposit ever discovered, pouring half of the world's silver supply into Europe. Did this infinite wealth secure the empire? No. It accelerated its collapse. The structural flaw was twofold. First, the influx of silver caused mass inflation across Europe, destroying the purchasing power of the money itself, a concept detailed by the School of Salamanca economists. Second, Spain lacked an industrial and productive base. As the scholar Juan Manuel Vázquez Navarro rightly points out, the empire simply extracted wealth and spent it on wars, imported luxury goods and palaces, bleeding the silver right back out to industrializing powers like France and England. They produced nothing, only extracted and consumed. This led to a structural deficit and massive debt. Under King Philip II, the empire, controlling more wealth than any nation in history, was forced to declare sovereign bankruptcy not once, but 4 times between 1557 and 1596. These defaults destroyed trust and forced the government into the final step of financial dishonesty, debasing the real by minting copper coins and forcing them to be valued as silver. The empire, having destroyed the value of its currency and the credit of its sovereign word, dissolved into irrelevance. The pattern is absolute. Overextension always leads to debasement, and debasement always destroys the financial engine of the empire. Standalone transition phrase: Britain proved the pattern accelerates. The British Empire, the most structurally advanced, attempted to anchor its value to an external constant, the gold standard. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency for 2 centuries, backed by a fixed amount of gold, the ultimate commitment to value. But the structural imperative of war, debt, and overextension, the same disease that killed Rome and Spain, proved stronger than gold. The war debt spike, World War I, exploded Britain's national debt by over 10-fold. To finance the total war, the government was forced to suspend gold convertibility in 1914, essentially printing money to fund the war machine. This suspension proved that when faced with the choice between defending the currency and defending the empire, the political class will always choose the latter, immediately betraying the financial promise made to its citizens. The fatal return, in a desperate, arrogant attempt to regain credibility, Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, returned Britain to the gold standard in 1925, but at the pre-war, overvalued rate. This was a structural error, forcing an artificial valuation onto a currency that had been diluted by war debt. It immediately made British exports uncompetitive, crushing the domestic economy. The economic logic was unforgiving. It was a failure of structural logic, not just political will. The final break, the result was inevitable. By 1931, Britain was forced off gold permanently. This was the structural recognition that the debt could no longer be honored. The currency became pure fiat, and trust began its terminal decline. Standalone transition phrase: the real decay started after the shooting stopped. The post-war bankruptcy, the final destruction, came after World War II, when the UK's debt reached 270% of its GDP. The empire had bankrupted itself. The structural realignment was formalized at the Bretton Woods Conference, 1944, where the US dollar, pegged to gold at $35 an ounce, officially replaced the pound as the world's primary reserve currency. The British were reduced from the architects of global finance to supplicants. The humiliation of devaluation. What followed was not a collapse, but a slow, humiliating decline. The series of devaluations in 1949 and 1967 and the crushing inflation of the 1970s were merely the visible symptoms of the primary cause. The currency had failed to hold its value, and without that value, the empire could no longer afford to maintain control. The pattern holds: military commitments, unsustainable debt, currency debasement, loss of reserve status. The imperial cost: the colonies didn't leave because they suddenly grew strong. They left because Britain could no longer afford the administrative and military costs of holding them. The empire dissolved because the currency, the structural foundation of its power, could no longer support the weight. Standalone transition phrase: we are living through the accelerated American repeat. The current regime operates with the same structural disease, but operating on an exponentially accelerated timeline. The US dollar, established as the global reserve currency at Bretton Woods, was, for a time, as good as gold. This structural promise ended in 1971, when President Nixon unilaterally closed the gold window, severing the last tangible link between the dollar and real value. This was the final structural transition from a sound currency to a pure fiat illusion, backed by nothing but the government's promise. The Fiat Finality, the sovereign's fatal delusion, is that this time is different. The debt, over $36 trillion and rising, is the most obvious symptom of structural failure. Like Rome debasing the denarius, like Spain flooding the market with Potosi silver, the United States, through the Federal Reserve, has printed trillions since 2008. The creation of $4 trillion in 2 years during the pandemic was an act of pure, debilitating debasement, not necessary stabilization. The inflation lie. They assured us modern economics had solved inflation. They lied. The resulting inflation is merely the mathematical consequence of printing more currency than production can support. This is the mechanism by which the exhausted elite are taxed without legislation. Your savings are diluted, your future purchasing power is stolen, and your exhaustion is compounded by the structural reality of shrinking capital. The de-industrialization. Vulnerability. Furthermore, we confront a structural vulnerability unique to this current empire. De-industrialization. As the astute observer noted, the US, fueled by a momentarily strong currency, offshored its production to maximize corporate profit. This is the Spanish Empire flaw repeated with a technological veneer. When the currency eventually goes bust and the cost of capital spirals, the country will lack the industrial base necessary to sustain a recovery or maintain the military commitments necessary to enforce reserve status. The income stream that sustained the empire is now purely financialized and deeply fragile. The long-term decay of infrastructure, from roads to digital networks, acts as a secondary collapse vector, invisibly bleeding the nation's productivity, a moral failure of leadership that further validates the structural critique. Standalone transition phrase. The world already understands the final act. The world is preparing for the inevitable. The BRICS nations are not merely forming an alliance, they are executing a deliberate strategic decoupling from the dollar system, aggressively trading in local currencies and stockpiling gold. In 2000, over 70% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, that number is in freefall. This is the beginning of stage 6, loss of confidence. The pattern doesn't care about technological advancement or American exceptionalism. It is simply the mathematics of unsustainable finance. The final cynical move of the global central banks buying record amounts of gold, assets that cannot be debased, is the ultimate condemnation of the current fiat architecture. They know the end is near. They are simply building their own lifeboat of sovereignty. The cynic knows that a structural collapse is not failure. It is the necessary corrective event. Failure belongs only to those who remain dependent on the illusion of abundance, growth. For the prepared, it is the strategic opportunity to reclaim sovereignty from the structural wreckage. The collapse is coming. You are being asked to choose your position, depend on a dying empire, or choose strategic self-sovereignty. Standalone transition phrase. Your exhaustion is a design feature. The illusion of growth is merely the structural mechanism used by the sovereign to maximize leverage and dependency across the system. The debt must be maximized, not minimized, because debt is the most efficient form of control over the productive class. Your exhaustion is a direct function of this system, draining your purchasing power through debasement. The system requires you to believe in the illusion of upward mobility, while simultaneously engineering the subtle, systematic theft of your earned value. The final cold strategy is Strategic Stoicism, the ultimate intellectual resistance. It is the realization that you cannot fight the math, but you can position yourself outside the structural design that guarantees your collapse. This is not about chasing yield. It is about embracing disciplines of minimal dependency. Subtraction as strategy. The first discipline is strategic subtraction. Focus not on what you can gain from the system, but what you can permanently remove yourself from. This means minimizing leverage and rejecting the debt imperative, the core tool of imperial control. When the collapse comes, debt becomes a wrecking ball. Freedom from debt becomes armor. Redefining real assets. Pivot your concept of wealth. Real assets are tangible, verifiable value that cannot be debased by a central banker. This is not just gold and silver, which serve as foundational monetary armor, but also land that is productive, energy sources that are decentralized, and skills that are essential and non-replicable by AI or automated systems. Financial value is fleeting. Structural utility is sovereign. The sovereignty of capital flow. You must establish independent capital flow. This means actively minimizing reliance on state-backed flow, e.g., fractional reserve debt lending or highly centralized payment rails. True sovereignty means a portion of your capital operates outside the immediate reach of the debasing sovereign. This is not rebellion. It is simply the logical, strategic action of an actor who recognizes the mathematical endgame. The prepared individual embraces the structural inevitability of decline not as a victim, but as a predator of opportunity, waiting for the system to purge its own excesses. Standalone transition phrase: the time for hope is over. The time for strategy is now. The Roman elites who survived the fall of the Western Empire did so not because they were loyal to the state, but because they held their wealth in land, in gold, and in the structural independence of their operations. They achieved structural arbitrage against the collapse. This is the exact same opportunity presented today. The collapse will destroy the overly financialized, leveraged, and dependent structures. It will not destroy the disciplined, sovereign individual who has chosen resistance through minimal dependency. The chaos is the transfer mechanism for power and wealth from the dependent to the prepared. You now understand the structural logic. The Daenerius is dying. The system is completing its cycle. The only remaining question is your position. Join the few who chose to see the structure. I'll wait for you here with the strategy. The ultimate question is not if the structure falls, but what comes next. To understand the design of the new sovereignty emerging from the wreckage, click on the video appearing here.